Yeah, welcome to today's Orchestrator. What do we have on the agenda? We have mainly topics regarding pull requests from Sage.
Yep.
Do you want to dive into ITW?
Sure. Yeah, just like right before this, I had a call with Juanmi and Alfonso and Ernesto, Daniel, and I forget who else talking about this. I guess here's what I'm thinking. I still think that Ceph ADM should stay out of the zone setup. I think it's important to think about who the users are and for prioritizing what we're actually focusing on. So there's the user, the end user, the customer who wants to set up multi-site. And I think what they want is there are going to be multiple ways you can set it up, right? You can have you can pre-write this complicated bit of YAML that's declarative and does everything all in one go. I think for an end user that actually isn't a great experience because if you get it wrong to iterate, you have to tear down the whole cluster again and start over again, and it's slow and it's YAML and which isn't that friendly and whatever. I think that's actually not the best experience. Or for an end user, you could have some documentation that says run these CLI commands to create the realm and the zone, and this is what it means, and explain it as it goes, and do that. That's sort of like a little bit tedious, but at least it's like understandable. And if you make a mistake, you can like back up and redo it. Or you could have a GUI that like is a nice wizard that sort of guides you through it and interactively like create zone and a thing pops up and I don't know, whatever, all that stuff. And I think that's be the nicest. But also obviously the furthest out. I think for an MVP, like for new clusters, for new users, new clusters setting up multi-site, I think just using the CLI to set up the realm and zone configuration before allowing the cluster to deploy the daemons, I think is totally reasonable. It's not like the greatest experience, but this is a one-time thing that happens like when you set it up. So like, I think it doesn't seem like it's that big a deal. And eventually we can do the rest. For us, I think actually the YAML specification that is a declarative, like this is the whole thing, do it all at once, I think is actually most important for us because we'll use it for QA testing and for CI and for everything else. And because we're like repeatedly setting up and tearing down clusters all the time, like I think we should still do a declarative form, but we're going to be the primary user and not like an end user. Like if B of A wants to set this up, they're not going to go like, I don't know, whatever. I think YAML isn't going to be the thing that's going to be most helpful for them. Which I think partly means that it doesn't need to be like super friendly or even necessarily robust. It just needs to be sufficient, the YAML mode of deploying all this stuff. And analogous to what Rook does, like Rook went through this whole process also where we, about a year ago when we were trying to figure out how to do multi-site with Rook. And what we basically decided was that the whole concept of like desired state and reconciliation loops and controllers like is just incompatible with how the site works because you have all the complexity in the multi-site realm stuff exists because you need to be able to have differing views of and versioned views of like what the state of the system is. So like right now, this cluster might be the master and this one might be the slave, but this one maybe goes down. And so you switch one to this master and you have this whole period concept with time progression and reconciliation and so on. And if you have multiple Kubernetes cluster with their quote unquote desired state reconciling that, it's never going to work. It's going to blow up and it's going to like get in the way. And so the Rook stuff was explicitly limited in scope to only setting it up the first time for like the initial deployment, and it doesn't do anything else. There's no reconciliation after that. And so I think we should do the same thing here where whatever we do implement in the YAML declarative form is also just set up the initial configuration and don't do anything after that. Right. And so as in terms of like the priorities for Pacific, I think they should be moving forward with removing the realm fiddling out of Ceph ADM, making sure that the documentation is accurate and complete and understandable for what the CLI commands are to like set up the multi-site config before you deploy the zones. Which I think we're mostly there. I don't think that the documentation. I think the documentation is probably pretty close. And then I think the last thing is understanding how Ansible deploys, and maybe this is mostly a downstream, but understanding exactly what the full universe of ways that Ansible can deploy multi-site, and making sure that we can redeploy those existing multi-site zones with Ceph ADM and have it not break. So we need to support the same set of options, either mapping them directly to Ceph config options and making sure that we can run the daemons on the same ports and all that stuff, so that we can have an orderly for an existing multi-site deployment that has petabytes of data and is like in live use. Like we need to be able to upgrade it and not totally make it blow up. And I think that's actually that's the thing that's most scary to me, and where I think most of the effort should be spent in the short term. Is that
a couple of things? Okay, I think that is a good plan. Okay, so with that, but we need to start to work as soon as possible. Okay, so well, I think that Daniel is going to start to do the test in order to deploy a cluster using Ceph Ansible, okay, with RGW multi-site, and see what are the things that we need to do in order to update, to adopt the configuration in a new Ceph ADM cluster. Apart of that, I think that we have luck, and part of the OpenStack team is here. Okay, so they can provide. I think that a quick feedback about what do you think about this the solution that Sage has described.
Hey, Juan. Yeah, I kind of agree on deploying minimal things and then providing documentation for having multiple step commands that you need to provide to end customers on a more complex scenario. So it's okay. We are still working on this declarative approach, having the spec, trying to describe as much as possible and translating the parameters defined in the director or in O, and providing us a valid spec for the Ceph deployment, basically. So I'm kind of okay with this kind of solution. But there are minimal things like the networking stuff we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, that it's mandatory for us. Yeah, because people have this kind of information from Ansible or another orchestration on top of CM, so it's okay having the networking information, this kind of things, and you to build a valid spec, basically.
Yeah, we're assuming that's work in progress, is running multiple daemons per node, having the ports vary for each of the daemons, figuring out what IP to bind to based on the network, the list of networks.
Yeah.
That's all on the list. That's in progress. So that'll be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
I guess,
sure,
and I guess the
John.
Okay.
Hmm?
Just one follow up here. I think that the case where having this like declarative, another user of the declarative form would be an opinionated installer. So if, I don't know exactly what's in scope for Director, but if Director has a thing where it automatically sets up two clusters and they're pre-configured to talk to each other.
No. We're planning to
not for our
Ceph cluster. No, go ahead, John.
Sorry, I mean it's not for RGW multi-zone.
Okay.
So what you were saying about that doesn't affect us at the moment. And since you've clarified it doesn't change the networking stuff we talked about last week, then this all sounds fine to us so far. We just need that networking stuff like we talked about, and it's still on the table, so that's good.
And I guess if it did, like hypothetically, if you were going to deploy an opinionated multi-start RGW, if you're doing this via an external orchestration tool, you could run the CLI commands that are necessary to configure the zone stuff.
Exactly.
And then hand the specification of how go deploy it now to the cluster. So I think it would still be okay.
I'm okay with that,
right.
because in OO we are trying to handle just day one. So we're going to deploy the first cluster with the basic services that we're going to support. Then the plan is to export the status of the big picture of the cluster, which is the spec, the YAML file you can export with the Orchestrator or CLI. And then everything should be day two operation. So setting up something different from the basic daemons that are supported and that were supported in Ceph Ansible, it's day two. So yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks.
I don't know if it's appropriate to ask now, but if the networking stuff we were talking about that's still on the table, I don't know if there's any update on that or it's still a work in progress. Is there anything more to say about that?
It's a work in progress.
Okay.
We're working on the scheduling piece. The next step after this is the port mapping piece. So it'll assign ports to different daemons. And then the step after that will be to choose the IP to bind to based on the subnet list. But it's roughly what we talked about before. Like the spec will have a list of subnets to choose from, and it will pick an appropriate IP out of those subnets, and daemon will get down to that one. That IP.
What we're probably going to do on the director side, or at least OpenStack, is that it's milestone 3. So depending on where that is, we might have our Wallaby release support Ceph ADM RBD deployment in full, and use Ceph Ansible still for if someone needs the RGW stuff, and then when the other stuff lands in X, we can do the full conversion in X.
Okay.
So we'll see, but that's something we might do.
As far as timing, I'm guessing that the full, like the network part, might not be in the initial Pacific release, but it will be in a subsequent point release. But it should be done in time for 5.0.
Awesome, cool, yeah. And I'm not trying to say like, oh, hurry up, I need this. I'm saying we can just do this until it's ready. We're
perfect. Okay.
You do what you need to do. We're not trying to rush you. Thanks.
Sounds good. Awesome. Okay, that helps. Bastian, does this sound reasonable?
Yes, it does. That's
okay.
Good.
I think the open question is still like, if we do want to support the spec, providing a spec in some form for like our own use. Like we have to decide what the minimal thing is that we can do there, whether it's just like create a zone in a realm and nothing else, or whether it's like run these CLI commands before you do the rest or something else. Not really sure, but we should.
Depending on how complex the setup is, we want to support.
Exactly.
Right? If it's super simple, just creating a realm and a zone, that's easy. But if we want to support more than that,
yeah, I think we should look at what Rook did, because we basically went through this whole process of like, what's the minimal set of CRDs we should define for Rook in order to allow you to like bring up a multi-site configuration for day one and nothing else. I think it might be helpful to go look at how that worked. And then
I wasn't really able to find the docs for it.
Yeah, somebody linked to it in the last call, and I was looking at it, and it was a bunch of their broken links, and it was confusing.
Is that on our site, Sage?
It was on the Rook.
Oh.
That was it. Yep. There you go, Daniel.
Okay.
Daniel's got it. But it didn't work. And so if you like a bunch of broken links here, but somewhere one of these has a link that does work. Here it is. I think this is probably the most complete page, which defines the actual CRDs. there's basically a realm CRD that optionally specifies which remote cluster to like pull it from. It's a zone group CRD, and there's an object zone CRD. So like, Sebastian, I don't know if it makes sense to create like specs in like new types that you can do Orchestrator that map to these CRDs.
We already have that. We already have that. We can apply hosts using the same mechanism using Ceph supply, but we have to introduce some kind of new thing because the service types are services. So we have to go one layer up and say it's a kind. We have the kind host that you can apply. You have the kind service that you can apply, and then you have other different kinds of things like realms, zones, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because like the word service type is already occupied to be specific to services.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my first sort of impulse is to do that, and then the orchestrator thing that we create would just map one-to-one onto the Rook one. And so for the Rook orchestrator, it would just basically create these CRs, and everything would just pass through, and it would work basically. But I don't know. Yeah, we should probably look at how much code actually Rook has to do this stuff, because I think in the case of like the realm, if you do a pull endpoint, it like runs some commands to go pull from the remote cluster, and there's secrets involved to bootstrap the whole thing. And we should decide whether that's actually what we want to implement in Ceph ADM or not. I think if so, then it's kind of nice because we're going to jump right to parity with both, which would be kind of nice without having to go redo everything again. So hopefully that's the case. But anyway. I think in the meantime, for the purposes of our testing and reproducibility, we can just have like run these 4 shell commands to create the zones and realms, and then apply the rest of the spec that deploys all the RTW zones. That would probably be sufficient for like our QA tests and repeatability and whatever else.
Yeah, right now the obvious downside is that you cannot assemble one big cluster spec and then apply it at bootstrap time, but you have to split it up into bootstrapping with a part of the spec file and then run a shell command and then apply the auxiliary spec file.
Because, well, I think that the things that who's the user of that? Like, are we the ones who like that, or is it like end users who like that? Because for us, I mean, it's cool, but like, I don't think a user would ever do that. It would be tests that would do that, right? And so having a 3-step test and bootstrap, run shell commands, and then more apply isn't really that much harder as far as the test goes.
It also helps us to provide to build up a consistent user experience. Everything is doable using one big cluster specification. We are making sure everything, even within Ceph ADM, is sane, like preventing deadlocks also.
Yep. Yeah, by that. But I guess that end experience could wait until we define these new CRD equivalents for realms and zones and stuff. I think that's the end goal. And in the meantime, just for our own testing or whatever, we can do the 3-step, so the 1-step process.
The definition is only for the creation. Is that true?
That too, yeah. Yeah. And if we really want to jump to having something that you can provide a single spec all at once, like we could have something sloppy in there, like before running this service, run this shell command. Which would be kind of gross, but like,
it's
I don't really like
that. I don't like it. It's too generic. It's a bit too generic for my for my thinking.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
But I don't know when we are. I don't know when we are able to build that.
Is this kind service something that already exists?
Not
kind
yet.
Host and kind service. Okay.
Not yet. So we have the hosts, but you're applying it with service underscore type colon host.
Oh, I see.
And that's a super weird way of doing it.
Yeah. But we could change that. Maybe sooner rather than later. It'd be nice if there was a new host specs out of the gate with specific, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Do
we want to talk about collocating services once again? Or
we could,
is everything okay?
I mean, I think it's looking pretty good. I think the only kind of open question in my mind is the stupid naming thing. It's sort of cosmetic, but okay, so there's that, and then there's also this idea of I think we need to understand what the behavior for the default behavior should be, because I think if you have a 2-node cluster and you say Birch apply MDS foo count 4, it should deploy 2 MDSs on each host, right? So there should be like an implicit max per host. In this case, implicit max host of, I don't know, like 8 or something, like some sort of reasonable number, maybe 4, right? But then if you did orch apply MDS foo label MDS node like that, like I think there should be an implicit num per host of maybe 1 or 2, right? Like something smaller. Like we don't want to go deploy like 16 MDS daemons like out of the gate.
Yeah, that's super complicated for MDS. If we are using the RJW thing of saying max per host or per host.
Although I guess that there's the MDS autoscaler, which will automatically that's count for you. So if we turn that on, then it will basically look at the file system property, how many active MDS ranks are supposed to be and how many standbys are supposed to be, and it'll adjust it to match that. But maybe this is okay. Maybe having a max. What's it?
If you think about it in terms of allow co-locating services, yes or no, then suddenly that makes sense, right? If we default allow co-locating services for MDS to true, we do it if we set it implicitly to true, then default supply foo count 4 will co-locate services implicitly. Yeah. That makes sense. If you say default supply foo MDS foo label MDS, then it will deploy as many hosts as you have implicitly. That perfectly makes sense. I have the impression that the per host count makes things a bit more complicated for us and for the user.
Yeah. Except that I think for the RGW case, we want that case. We actually want a per host.
Yes.
So maybe getting rid of max per host and renaming it count per host.
One thing about that is because I think that we are trying to specify the placement just with a number, okay? And well, if we do that, and I think that the way to do we need to distribute evenly the diamonds between all the hosts that are available, okay? If the user wants to deploy more than 1 or 2 different diamonds in one specific host, probably he should use a more complicated placement clause, okay? So maybe I think that trying to introduce a new variable max per host in order to see what is the number maximum of demos that we can put in one host is to do the things complicated. It's just if you're going to use one number only as placement, what we are going to do is to distribute evenly the demos between all the hosts available. If you want to do another different thing, well, use a more complex placement is what I think.
Yeah. Here's a question: if we went with an allow collocation boolean, is that an intrinsic property of the type, or is it a property of this placement spec?
Sorry, I don't understand, Sage.
Placement spec. Placement spec.
Of
the placement, yeah.
But is it intrinsic to the type of service?
I would say I would default it to false for now for all different service types. And user have to explicitly set it to true, at least for now. I'm a bit conservative when it comes to making super weird, super advanced scheduling decisions default to true by for Ceph ADM. That would mean that count colon 4 would default to only placing one daemon per host by default. And if you want to allow collocating, then you would have to say allow collocation colon true. And then it would bid out the four daemons.
But I mean, it seems like for something like the MDS, we would want it to automatically do that, right?
Yes.
Like I think MDS should just automatically collo true.
Yeah. I mean, we already have default placement specs.
Right, but I mean, if you did orch apply MDS foo count 10, like that should collocate by default. You shouldn't have to say, count 10 collo true or whatever.
Yeah, we can do that by type. That's not a big problem.
Okay. Because if we do it by type, then I wonder if it needs to be part of the placement spec. Like, do we actually need it in the placement spec at all? Or can it be an intrinsic property of the type and not of the placement spec?
For managers, we probably want to default it to false. Except if you want to replace Ceph Nano, then you need to set it to true.
Maybe, yeah. Because I guess what I'm wondering is this: like, if we get rid of max per host and instead we have a count per host and it's mutually exclusive with count, then we would just get rid of the cases where you have both a max per host and a whatever. That just wouldn't happen, right? So you would use count per host in combination, used in combination with labels, filters, etc. So like count per host for label RGW, and then or like host RGW foo or whatever it is, host filter. What is it called? I don't know, whatever. It'd be like that.
I think it's label colon. No, it's you mean the pattern?
Yeah, the pattern.
I think it's called pattern.
Oh yeah, whatever. It'd be like if you could do something like that, or you would have count 10 for like an MDS, but you would never say count 10, count per host 3. This would be an error because you're sort of over specifying because it depends on how many hosts there are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that would actually make the code a little bit simpler. It would make the name of this setting less confusing because it's like kind of explicit what it means. And the fact that it has count in it sort of be a clue that it conflicts with the other count.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. And then I think the question is, do we need this flag? Like allow.
For managers?
Why do we need multiple managers on the same host for Ceph Nano?
Otherwise we can't upgrade.
Oh, right.
We can't upgrade with a single manager.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I mean, I think that yeah. I think in order to make that work, the manager standby mode has to be disabled. So there could be a Ceph setting that does that. And one way to do it would be that Ceph ADM, if that setting is on, then the per service type behavior is that colocation is okay. And if that setting is off, then the behavior is that colocation is not okay. Like we could still get away with not putting it in the placement spec if we wanted to. I'm just trying to think like when would the user actually do this? Like allow colo true or false? Like it almost seems to me like instead of allow colo, we could have max per host.
So
right.
I know that DeepSeek doesn't
be used
support.
In combination with count.
I know that DeepSeek doesn't really support co-locating services of the same type. Kubernetes has an explicit flag to allow it or to disable it. I don't know about Ansible and co-locating services.
Yeah, I think it's hard-coded based on the type.
I mean, we probably going to have customers that are pretty scared about automatic placement, right? And they will likely be able to control it manually. But if we can get away with not adding it to the placement spec, I mean, why not? We can add it later on anyway, if it turns out to be needed.
Yeah.
Omitting it right now works for me.
It leads me back to our original thing of if you do have a colocation flag, then a max is like just is the same but a little bit more communicative, I guess, or whatever. Like you could imagine saying that I can run up to 2 MDSs per host or something like that. Should be the same as allow colo.
Yeah, with the last example is clear what you want to do. Okay, so I think that better than to use the collocated flag.
Yeah. Because this basically would mean that we would have two options. We would basically split it into two options. One would be a count per host, which is mutually exclusive with count. And then there'd be a max per host, which is used in combination with count. But then what would happen if we had label and then max per host too? Like what would this mean?
I would omit max per host. Either count or count per host. I mean, I don't really find it as an optimal solution, but I think it works for now.
Only using count.
Where max per host is more or less a flag, a low collocation on yes or no.
Yeah.
Either you set it to 1 or you set it to something not equal to 1.
Okay. Okay, so I'll rejigger this. I think partly this is going to fall out from like, I think the count per host is no, the max per host is sort of a per daemon type, and it's more like a Boolean, I guess, internally. Yes.
The problem with max per host is that we are only looking into one specific service type, and the end goal would probably to provide a way to limit the resource usage of the whole host.
Yeah.
Like saying, I want to have I have 3 NDS hosts. 2 of them are serving one file system, and I have 3 NDS hosts, and 2 of them are serving one file system, and the other 2 are serving a different file system. And the max per host is then per globally for the whole host, and doesn't really make sense per service.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's really a scheduling. Like what we really want instead of that is like core and.
Yeah, I want to have 2 cores per MDS, or I don't know, and then let the scheduler figure out what the user wants.
So for now, then we can go with count per host, which is used in combination with patterns and labels and stuff, but not count. And in the count case, we just have an intrinsic property of the type that's hard coded in that says whether we collocate or not. Does that sound okay?
That sounds good.
Okay. All right. Okay. I can proceed with that.
Okay. Completely different topic. We have 3 ways to specify. We have 2 open pull requests regarding NFS version 3, which is super old. We have pull request here. That's just a documentation thing. We have this one here that adds it to the NFS server specification. Like we talked about it yesterday. And only fixing it in the documentation has its downsides. Like for example, it's like a feature of last resort. We are able to change the Jinja 2 template when deploying NFS daemons. We are able to change the Jinja 2 template for the Ganesha.conf when deploying NFS daemons. And one way would be to just let the user replace that table, that template, without touching the code. And the other alternative would be to add the protocol to the server specification, and that's a full-blown feature then. And we have to somehow decide between those 2 options.
Is the only end goal here to enable NFS v3?
And the other one is that right now the dashboard supports NFS v3 as a selection in the dashboard when creating NFS shares. I am okay with dropping the full-blown NFS support in Ceph ADM and just let the user replace the template. But that would be a regression in the dashboard. Any thoughts?
When you say full-blown...
Sorry, go ahead, Sage.
You're saying that Ceph ADM has a bunch of code that like constructs the config file for you? Is that basically what you're saying? Based on
yes, based on the template.
And so I kind of struggle with these templates a little because you have to have like inside knowledge of Ceph ADM. It kind of restricts our implementation a little bit.
That's not user-friendly, indeed.
Yeah.
Question is, do we want to make it user-friendly and then make it a real feature? Or is it okay that it just works? Even though it's not pretty.
I guess I would lean towards just adding support, making it user-friendly and adding support for 3 in Ceph ADM. Like that's what this first one is, right?
Second pull request.
The second pull request. Oh, you have to go replace the Jinja. Yeah, that's not user-friendly. No. Yeah, adding it to the spec. That seems like the way to do it. And then maybe in the longer term, like I guess I'm wondering, is this a general problem that we're going to keep hitting as people want to like make any changes to Ganesha configs? Like we have to add support for every single one.
That's a problem that Helm charts are having. So like they start with a few configuration options and try to be opinionated as possible, and then after a while a new use case pops up, and then you need to add the possibility to modify the specific config options, and then after a while another config options need to be added, and then after a while the Helm chart is getting really complicated.
This is why I like the sort of like a pass-through, so you can specify arbitrary extra stuff, the stuff in the config file. Because it's sort of a compromise between the two. Like most of the time you don't need it, but if you do have something that's sort of off in the weeds, then you have a path forward.
I would like to avoid having the server specs being kind of complicated as Helm charts.
Yeah. Well, I think if in this case we're already specifying. Oh, because we already saved protocols 4, and we want to have to be able to add others in there. Hold on. Yeah. I guess I would lean towards this one since it's pretty easy. And then the next time add something that's that lets you just specify extra key value data to stuff in the thing. This one's a little bit weird because we're already defining the option. And so it would be like an override and not like a extra stuff. So it makes sense to allow you to add it to the spec.
Overriding doesn't work with NFS Ganesha.
Yeah, I think that's why it makes sense to add support for this one to the spec. Because we already have a default in there.
I mean, is NFS version 3 still a thing?
I actually kind of thought we didn't. I thought we didn't actually support NFS 3 anyway. That was my other question. Like I thought all that clustering work that that Jeff Layton did, I thought that only worked with 4.
It does. Yeah, that's the other part of it is V3 doesn't really support multi-head very well. And so, there's a risk here. But if you do like an active passive thing, you're okay coming from like prior Octopus. But Rook deployments are completely multi-head using Ganesha Grace. So that's why you want 4 only. This is more like a legacy support thing. Like maybe there's some Windows NFS or something that somebody needs. It's kind of an edge case.
Is there a specific user or customer or use case or something that's motivating this change?
Mostly people coming from Nautilus that have existing deployments that are active passive. And the dashboard problems Sebastian mentioned. So maybe it's a good opportunity to just go NFS v4 only. Maybe that's what we ought to do here. and say everything's multi-head.
Do you have people that you can talk to find out if that is feasible? Like, I don't know any NFS users to like ask if that's okay, but
I don't either. No. I think that's the problem is we keep contriving use cases around this. But one of the things is like if we think where we're moving with Ceph ADM, maybe we want an HA proxy. Maybe we want this multi-head eventually, kind of like what we're doing with RGW. And would adding this protocol get in our way to doing that? I'll add another challenge.
Yeah, right. Because NFS3, you need to like there are a whole bunch of services, right? Instead of a single port, like Mount D.
Yeah, it uses port mapper, and the port moves around, and there's NLM problems, and so
yeah, it'd be nicer just to drop it.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe do you want to like email? Can you get email Ceph users and ask? Like make the subject, can we drop NFS3 support or something like that? Or is anybody using NFS3?
So there's one or two people that have popped up that have tried to do it and manually hack Ceph ADM to do this, but then they come to the realization, oh, the community's already declared this is not supported. Because I think we put that in our doc already.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I think we're looking for a way that like maybe we can let people do it, but strongly discourage them not to. Make it kind of not so easy or user friendly.
Yeah, I mean, the only way I see that, I mean, this other one is like, go edit the template inside the container. Oh, no, you can override it in the... Oh,
yeah, you can override it from the config keys now.
Yeah, so maybe that is the way to go. With like a big caveat that this will probably break.
Overriding the template is a feature of last resort. Like, it's possible to do that, and it's super flexible. But it's super problematic when upgrading Ceph.
Yep, because and there isn't a way to like see what the starting template is, right?
You have to look into the source code.
Yeah.
I mean, we could provide a way to just return the template for a given service type.
Yeah.
Like Ceph ADM get template and then specifying which template and just print out to the shell.
Yeah, that might be good.
I am kind of concerned though that this would make upgrades hard because it's so tied to the implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely would. It means that you're sort of likely to break on upgrade.
Yep.
Yeah. But I mean, if we want NFS3 in this category of like not supported, then I don't know.
Yep.
I don't really like the first pull request. Sorry, the second one to adding it to the spec. I mean, I think that's the right way to do it if we want to support it, but I don't think we should support it. I think we sort of want to.
Yeah. Okay.
Michael, do you want to go ask on the list and try to?
Okay. Sure, I can try. I'm sure we'll get some interesting, comments. I'll throw something out there.
Okay. Thank you. I think we are out of time today.
Yep.
Or is there any critical thing we need to talk about?
Should we, that ports pull request session, is that on top of my other one, or is it, I can't remember.
Which one?
The one that adds the ports. I haven't looked at your review yet. It's not on top of my other one. Oh, no, it is. That gathering reports, the ports that are used.
Yeah, it's on top of the other pull request.
Okay, so I guess we should get that one in first.
Yeah.
I'll focus on that then. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Sounds good.
Have a nice day.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.